Republican platform brought you to the Republican Party?
Well, I sort of like, even though I'm philosophically a libertarian, I call myself a libertarian Republican, I like the idea that instead of spending time in the Libertarian Party preaching to the choir, that I'm preaching to the unconverted. There are a lot of Republicans who will talk the talk on free markets and free market economics, but they don't necessarily have the philosophical underpinnings that I want them to have, so that they can be, stronger warriors for the stated principles, what the Republicans claim to believe: freedom, individualism, liberty. So I actually think that the Republican Party is a good platform for libertarians to get involved, to help give the party the real bona fides, the limited government bona fides that I think they need. Because very often you'll even see it here at CPAC. Like Rick Santorum is upstairs advocating for mandatory, paid family leave. Right? That's not conservative. Right. So I think that holding conservatives to their principles is actually an easier task inside the party than it is with the outside of the party.
Okay. Yeah. And so the Republicans nominated Josh Hawley in that Senate race in 2018, and he beat Claire McCaskill. You coined Air Claire.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by the Republicans flipping that seat?
I was not. Claire McCaskill was very unpopular. I actually, one of the reasons why I sought that opportunity is because I thought if I could become the nominee, which would be a giant challenge in itself, that Claire McCaskill could get beaten by almost anybody.
Yeah.
Why not me, right? But unfortunately that didn't happen. But the fact that we flipped that seat and we have a senator who's concerned about things like originalism, who talks about the Constitution, who has taken some decent votes since he's got on there, and he fights on some issues that we don't necessarily see eye to eye on, but I think are good fights. He actually has taken up the cudgel of going after social media, not just for the deplatforming of conservatives, but specifically because he thinks that they exercise power and authority that should be regulated. That's a debate we could have. But I do think that these social media companies wield an inordinate amount of power over the American people. And, if I was in his position, I would have loved to have questioned Mark Zuckerberg when he came in front of those congressional hearings. So, yeah, I think that the fact that we got Claire McCaskill out of there was definitely a big win.
For sure, and obviously grew the lead that the Republicans hold in the Senate.
Correct.
You mentioned your four free market principles, and you want to maintain that laissez-faire attitude when it comes down to the economy. Mm-hmm. When people, I actually had a conversation a little bit ago with someone a viewer walked up and was asking me if I felt like Right Side was being threatened to be deplatformed, and basically was like, yeah, I would be all for regulating those industries. And I believe a lot of Republicans, when they saw how Facebook shadow bans and how Twitter shadow bans and does a lot of these deplatforming tactics, that they are for regulation. How do you argue against that as somebody who wants to remain principled in these conversations?
Well, I think, unfortunately, people are always legislating based on a current situation rather than an understanding of looking out 5, 10, 15 years from now. Yeah. Because what will frequently happen is you'll have regulatory capture, right? You'll have people who will go and work for the social media companies, and then they'll go work in Congress, so they'll become lobbyists in Congress.
Right.
Or perhaps sometimes they'll become congressmen themselves, or former congressmen will go and work for a social media giant. So what will happen, unfortunately, is that while it sounds like a great idea, like it would help us, it may actually end up hurting us, because what might happen is that the social media company might lobby and say, well, if you're going to have this kind of regulation, then okay, we're going to submit to this. However, we're going to want to have a sweetheart deal that's going to enshrine us. If you're going to hurt us, then they might have an argument to say, well, the government should also be helping us. Right. And they might demand that they get some kind of benefit that will squash market competition, right? So you're going to get a negative unintended consequence quite frequently. So it might actually help Facebook to be regulated, and then it screw the potential challengers to Facebook that could come up 5, 10, 15 years from now. I think it's better right now to wait and see, report on what they're doing, you know what I mean, and call out what I believe may be an injustice. But when you start putting regulation, there's all these negative unintended consequences that, again, in the future might actually hurt us more than help us.
Okay. And so whenever I mention your name to somebody on the right side, or just someone who's very politically aware of what's going on, a lot of people kind of lump you into the conversation. That includes Rand Paul, Justin Amash, and Thomas Massey. The last two, Thomas Massey and Justin Amash, are representatives of their district, and yet you would take shots for the presidency. You took a shot at the Senate. What about being a representative of a district was something that just wasn't appealing to you?
Well, you know, a lot of people don't know this because it was just like inner campaign strategy, but we were prepared during our Senate run if we weren't raising enough money and if an opportunity presented itself to potentially sidestep into a House race because there was a chance that, you know, Ann Wagner might have run for that instead of Josh Hawley, right? And if so, then that might have been an open congressional district. You know, there's a chance in my home district in Missouri where I grew up.
Stickers?
Yeah, please do.
Yes, sir.
No, but I got a lot of stickers.
Good. So if a House seat had been open and available, I might have done that because the reason why the Senate primary was a good opportunity is because it was an open chance for a Republican, semi-open chance. The party didn't treat it like that. Yeah, I think that there's absolutely an argument to be made for getting involved in a House race for somebody like myself. But right now, I'm going to focus on being the voice of liberty in my state, and I have a great platform for that now, and I can focus on what I really enjoy, which is talking about the ideas. See, I did get a good chance to spread the ideas of liberty in my campaign, but only within certain boundaries. You know, when you go to a Lincoln Days dinner, you have 12 candidates, and everybody gets 2 minutes to speak, so I would drive 4 hours to speak 2 minutes to a group, you know, and that's so frustrating. So now they have to listen to me for 3 hours a day, every day in the morning, and I'm free to really be myself and to extrapolate on important topics and to explain to people why freedom works, you know.
And so, obviously, President Trump declared a national emergency when it came down to the border wall, which has led Representative Andy Biggs from Arizona to declare the debt a national emergency.
Yes.
And a lot of people have called for a state's convention to add an amendment to the Constitution on forcing a balanced budget.
Love it.
You would support that idea then?
I would absolutely support an amendment to the Constitution for a balanced budget. I believe that we should be living within our means. I think that the national debt is a far greater emergency than illegal immigration. But even if it is an emergency, and it is a national emergency, then I think that it should still go through the proper constitutional checks and balances. See, the big problem that I have with the emergency declaration is that, one, I believe that it's unconstitutional. And two, I also think that illegal immigration is not a national emergency. That's going to make a lot of conservatives upset. But do you live in Hawaii? Do you live in Alaska? I mean, is Hawaii, fearing border jumpers? Is Alaska suffering from the negative effects of illegal immigration? I don't think so. A national emergency to me is something that every single state in the entire union is under a direct threat. Texas, yes. Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, absolutely. I'd like to see the states through the 10th Amendment empowered to take up more of a role in border security. I think Texas would probably do that. But unfortunately, I think that people look to the federal government to solve our problems rather than using federalism to solve many of these problems. I think illegal immigration could potentially be stemmed if we had more of a states' rights approach.
And so you mentioned the 10th Amendment. If I were to ask you about the cabinet positions within the executive branch right now, which positions right now, which positions do you believe should not be there in the federal government and should be completely left up to the states? We've got the Department of Education, there's the Department of Energy, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. How many of these agencies do you feel are unnecessary at the federal level and should be replaced down to the states?
Honestly, all of them, but whatever's unconstitutional, right?
Okay.
So honestly, I feel like I really am concerned about the state of education in the United States. I think, if anything, most of our problems stem from a lack of understanding about how our government processes work. I think that we're not getting enough history. I think we're not getting enough of the humanities. I honestly feel as if we had stronger constitutional knowledge, then we would have stronger candidates. Even conservative candidates frequently will run on unconstitutional platform ideas. Not to just beat up on Rick Santorum, but I mean, where in the Constitution does the federal government have the authority to legislate, right? What happened to Congress shall make no law, right? I like the idea of negative rights of the U.S. Constitution. But I mean, I think that the lack of historical knowledge, the lack of understanding of economics is the primary reason why people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez get elected. People like Bernie Sanders get elected because people think that the role of government is to give us things. People want something from their government. I don't really want anything from their government. And then they'll say, Austin, who will build the roads? Well, you know what? Okay, if all the government did was build roads, then maybe I would not complain. I probably would, but because it would still be taxed for it. But but honestly, I think that the National Education Association, I think that the labor unions that comprise the teachers unions, I think that the administrative process of our federal government through the education process with a top-down approach is really what's creating the biggest problem in our society. A lack of historical knowledge. And people don't care. They just don't like history. You know what I mean? They think it's boring. So we need better teachers, and we need more localized education that creates a dependency. I think people need to be dependent on their localities, but we've all become dependent on the feds. That's really the main problem right now.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro frequently says, go to your family, go to your community, go to your mosque, your
families,
church,
friends,
your
neighbors,
temple,
churches.
and then you continue to go up the ladder. But now the current approach is let's start at the federal government.
Right.
Let's forget the other steps in the ladder. Couldn't agree more with you on that one. Just a couple more questions, if you don't mind. Bill Barr was just confirmed to be the new Attorney General, and a lot of people had concerns about his positions on the Second Amendment. A lot of people had his concerns on his position with the Fourth Amendment.
Yeah.
As somebody who came from the Libertarian side, where do your concerns with Bill Barr come from, if you have any?
Well, the problem with the red flag laws that he's signaled his support for is that it abrogates due process. It's really a question of, if you can report someone and say this person is a danger to themselves and others, and police can then move in and take their weapons, I mean, that could create a situation where that could be escalated. That person then might see what I would see as a legitimate need for defense to defend their intrinsic individual natural right. So we're sort of squeezing due process when it comes to the Second Amendment. And then ironically, we're sort of expanding due process when it comes to the Eighth Amendment. That's been recently incorporated in the states because of the Supreme Court, which I think found...
just about to ask you about that,
yeah. Which I think it was found, that case was found correctly. Ironic that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the person who handed down that decision. I think they wanted to give her that to her, obviously, as maybe a legacy decision for her. But good for her, bully for her. And the problem with the red flag law is, one, I think it creates more danger. I saw that the ATF was posting about the agents who were killed when they went and raided Waco, which I thought was, I don't support crazy cults, but I mean, they had a right to have their own religion and their own thing as long as they weren't abusing anyone, but we don't know that they were doing that.
Right.
And, I tweeted at the ATF, don't start none, won't be none, right? Because I really do believe that the rights of the individuals come before the state, before the collective. Yeah. But I think, what I really think it boils down to, I honestly feel as if we are really, good times in the United States are creating soft men. And because we are softening ourselves, we are allowing ourselves to allow fear to drive our policies. And if you're not willing to accept a level of danger in society, a certain level of danger, then you're not going to be free, right? You can be totally safe, go to jail, 3 hots and a cot all day long, right? The only thing you don't have is freedom. Right. Eisenhower bastardization, right? But the fact of the matter is that we need to be able to endure a certain amount of danger in this country. And at some point, it sounds callous as hell, but I'm not running for office anymore, so I'll just say it, right? Sometimes you pay the price of freedom. And the price of freedom sometimes means people are going to die. The government can't protect everybody from dying. And people will sometimes say, and this is even more callous, people will say, how many people have to die before you give up your guns? All of them. All of them. Because my individual rights trump your collective desire for security or freedom. Because in the end of the day, even the founding fathers acknowledged that our individual rights were superior to the government that they themselves created when they said in the Declaration that we have the right to alter or abolish that thing. Right? So if our rights came from the government, we would have no right to abolish it, right? We'd have no authority to do so. But if government is hostile to these ends, the ends being individual liberty, freedom of speech, Second Amendment, then we have the right to even overthrow that government like we did in 1776. That's not what I'm advocating for, but ultimately that's what they believe. They did it, and we need to maintain that spirit of resistance to say, you know what, Mullen Lob, don't tread on me. Come and take it, and I think that the emotional assaults on our freedom, because we as mostly men are caving in, and we are allowing our nation to really, I think, become overly feminized. I'm not using feminine pejoratively. I think there needs to be a balance, but at some point, strong men will be needed to defend our country, because at the end of the day, when the fighting comes, Who's on the front lines? It's us. Yeah. We're the ones putting our lives on the lines. And there have to be decisions made. That means that sometimes you're going to have to say, you know what, come and take it.
Yeah. Do you see this generation that I'm a part of, and the upcoming generations, do you see the potential for them to come back to that toughness, that sense of individuality?
You know what? I think we're sort of at a turning point. I think about this all the time. I think that if we continue to have a strong economy, ironically, we may get softer, and we may have, there's an old saying, like good times create soft men create hard times create rough men, and rough men create good times, right? It can become cyclical, right? And I'm not an anarchist, right? I consider myself a minarchist. My anarchist friends will attack me all the time. Yeah, you're a statist, Austin. You're terrible. You want the government just grow, that minimal government. If you believe that it's a natural tendency of government to grow and never to shrink, then you should just abolish government and have no government. Well, I guess I kind of understand that is the natural cycle of things. Yep. I mean, Thomas Jefferson wanted a bloody revolution every 20 years. That might be a bit much.
A little bit.
Perhaps. But, I mean, these are the times that try men's souls. I think that there is a strength within the Trump movement, the populist movement right now that is, I think, inherently masculine in many ways. But that can be dangerous. It can go off the rails. And it can go not just, I think it can, sometimes you can do overly macho, and that you can be saber rattling and be interventionist and be hawkish and like Marco Rubio and end up down the path of John Bolton in war, and that can be bad, right? But I honestly am optimistic, because in the Trump movement, though they are brave and they've got bravado, and there's a lot of strength within Trumpism, a lot of huevos, right? It's also, there's a dovish aspect. He's going to North Korea. He's trying to have peace. He's trying to pull troops out of Syria, and much to the chagrin of the establishment of the Republicans and now the Democrats, who used to be the anti-war party. So I'm pretty optimistic. I think that if we can maintain the sort of foreign policy credentials that we have, peace through strength, making America great again, there is a libertarian aspect to that. But it can go off the rails. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I know I'm going to be part of shaping it towards pushing these ideas more towards libertarianism, because within populism are some libertarian aspects, but also there are some authoritarian aspects as well. Build the wall. And eminent domain, right? No, not big fans. I used to debate Republicans during the U.S. Senate campaign. They're like, well, what do you mean you're not for the wall? I'm like, well, it's a massive FDR-style public works program that's going to raise spending, raise taxes, and steal land from Republicans in Texas. Do you like it now? And they'll maybe they'll change their mind about things. So big government is big government. It's still big government when we do it, right? It's still big government when we do it. Sometimes people like to say that conservatism is just progressivism driving the speed limit, And when you see Rick Santorum and others advocating for those kinds of things, you're like, those are the people who are headed in that direction. Yeah. I'm headed the opposite direction. I want to put on the brakes. I want to go in the opposite direction. I want less government. I want more freedom.
All right, and just two more questions for you.
Sure.
2020.
Yeah.
Democrat fields, very crowded.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Trying to hit every level of the intersectionality pyramid. Trying to hit all the farthest left extreme policies they can all reach.
Yeah.
Gillibrand hits 3 positions at one time. Which one wins the nomination, in your opinion, at this moment, not counting Beto or Biden?
Okay. Oh, not counting Beto or Biden?
Only the ones that have announced.
I mean, without Beto or Biden, I would say Bernie.
Okay.
Because he's a fundraising juggernaut. He has name ID.
Yeah.
The party is being dragged to the left because of people like him. But ultimately, whoever the Democratic nominee is, in my opinion, I think Trump will blow them out of the water. I think Trump will actually increase his vote total. And remember, this is somebody who ran against him in 2016, right? So I have no incentive to kiss his butt or say, I'm voting for him. I've come around to the president. Still disagree with quite a few things, and I do feel like there is a push by many Republicans. You agree with everything he says or you're out, and I'm resistant to that. I think it's good. We don't want to be like the liberals and be uniform, and we want a nice health. We ironically are more diverse than the Democrats, right? We're ideologically diverse, right, in some ways. So we need healthy skepticism, right? There were 13 Republicans who voted against his national emergency declaration, but I think that Trump will increase his vote totals. I think that he'll increase his votes in the Electoral College. I think the Democrats will be wiped out. I think that Bernie is going to destroy all the other anti-establishment candidates. I've been calling them Yas Queens. People like Kirsten Gillibrand will get crushed.
Yeah.
People like others they're just not going to be able to outraise Bernie. And Bernie is the stalking horse for whoever may get into the race, who I think will be the nominee, who's not in there yet.
Right. I'm with you on that. And final question for you. What is Aleppo?
What is Aleppo? What is it? Is it I don't know, anagram? I don't know. He got so confused by that question.
He really did.
I remember if you don't know what the answer to the question was, he hated canned answers, and I'm usually off the cuff guy myself. But if I hadn't known what Aleppo was in just that moment, if I had a brain fart, I would have just said, well, what does that have to do with the United States? I'm president of the United States, not president of Aleppo. Like, I would have thought it would have maybe taken me a few seconds to figure out, oh, yes, Syria, okay. Well, the commander-in-chief has no options in Syria unless the Congress gives him the proper congressional authority. So the question isn't what would I do about Aleppo? The question is, what would Congress do about Aleppo? Because it's their prerogative.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Austin Petersen, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Jefferson City, Missouri. Make sure you tune into his radio show starting April 15th. Austin, thank you for stopping by.
Thanks so much.